I didn't say, hello, dear, have you remembered the time? Because I didn't want to upset you. That's why we are late. Now, you try telling a spouse the truth of something like that in a cult like ours. Oh, they'll get a divorce, they'll punish you for 3 months, they'll go into fits of panic. No, and we're not going to therapy, and no, I don't need that, and how? And you try and teach because they have been shamed. They have been shamed, deeply shamed that not knowing something makes them unlovable. And they got that at 5 years old. And you're pointing out that they don't know something. Now, your rational brain says, of course you don't know something. You don't know 99.9% of all there is to know. Nobody does. Nobody can. You've got a zoom-in lens. There's a lot you can't focus on at one time. The more you zoom in here, the less you're going to be oblivious, the more you're going to be oblivious out here. The more you notice in this detail here, the less you're going to notice here. The more you specialize, the less general knowledge you've got. There's a ton of stuff you don't know, you can't know, you never will know. That's a problem, though, if they feel the trigger of shame and the message that they will not be loved if they don't know anything. Now, it's a problem because the reason they're so upset is because they hear two messages. One, they're hearing the fact that you think they're unlovable, and that's why you're pointing out that they don't know something, which they don't know. But they're also, they've figured out in their childhood wisdom, that the reason you're pointing this out is to justify abandoning them. So they're unlovable because they don't know anything, because their parents did not love them when they didn't know things. And so you're pointing out that they don't love something. You're saying they're unlovable, and they are not unlovable. They're sick of that. They're not going to be told they're unlovable. And they're responding, I know that, and da-da-da. It makes no sense until you understand trauma, which, of course, you will not understand because you are an American. And we don't believe in educating our people on emotional facts, let alone the psyche or anything feminine. We're much too dumb to understand our stupidity, and we're proud of it. So in this dynamic, she has not only heard that she's unlovable, she's heard that the reason you're pointing it out is you are preparing to abandon her just like her parents. You're preparing to punish her. And she is not going to be punished just because she didn't run the time. And so she has a fit. She has a fit that she doesn't understand. She has a fit that ashames her, because she understands on some level that this is a little bit excessive, particularly in a culture that says she is too emotional for having feelings. She understands that this is shameful, and then she gets even more angry because she doesn't quite know what's going on. There's another thing she doesn't know. She's going to punish the hell out of you for that. How dare you elicit this reaction in me that makes me look bad, which then is another excuse you're going to leave me for. I'm going to punish you again for that because I don't want to be left. I don't want to be abandoned. Okay, you want me to carry all of that and pretend that nothing is going on because, of course, you knew all of that, even in a trauma-illiterate culture. You knew all of that, didn't you, sweetie? Okay, right? Okay, so fine. We can't talk about any of that. I have two choices. We can be late, and I'll shut up, or we can go through all of that and have a fight for a week. I think we're going to be late. But you then are going to blame me for being late. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you do this? You're the driver. As if that whole dynamic didn't exist. As if you had no idea what the time was and You weren't trying to stop me from a week of fighting, and so you take the hit. So you say, you're right. You're right. I'm an idiot. I can't even keep track of the time. No, I couldn't set an alarm. No. That's why we're late. You're right. And then she's happy. She's happy because she has avoided the hook into the belief, the traumatic childhood message of her unlovability. She's avoided the hook into also feeling that she's insane, which she is, of course, because she does not understand what she's doing. She's sending completely mixed messages. She's having fits if you tell her something, but she's saying she wants to know. That's an insane, that's a mixed message. That's two people fighting in two different directions. And you're smart enough to follow the strongest feeling. You're smart enough to realize that if she's going to have a fight over nothing for a week, she must feel more angry if you tell her than if she just glares at you for 10 seconds and says, "Why didn't you tell me?" So you have a glare for 10 seconds, or you have a week of fighting. Now, a logical, sane person is going to say, you care more about not knowing than you care about knowing. I care about you. That's the problem with being in love and trying to be nice to other people, is you're stuck in these loops. So you care more about this than this by your visceral behavior. Now, we can't talk about this because that would mean you didn't know something. And that would mean a whole nother fit. And probably it means you will leave me because you're so convinced I will leave you and that the whole thing is a setup to leave you. And I have had women do this to me on multiple occasions. Point out something that is taboo to be pointed out. They read that in their mind as I'm pointing it out so that I can stop loving them. And then they decide they're not going to be not loved, blah, 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 so they're going to leave. And the only other option available to me is to stay insane in one of these patterns that goes on and on for years because it can't be faced. It's too terrifying for a 5-year-old girl. And that's how old she is emotionally when this dynamic is in play. It's too terrified for a 5-year-old girl to go into this terrain. But it's too terrifying for me as a 6-year-old punished little boy who's trying to point these things out with my parents, to be constantly raged at for telling the truth. It's too terrifying for me. And so the relationship with an otherwise great partner is dissolved and destroyed to protect the barrier that says we're not able and willing to go into this pain. That is the bottom line rule that we're operating from. That's the number one deity in the relationship. So this pattern is bringing up this pain for one or both of us. Therefore, it must end. You must go so that I can keep my consciousness controlled on happy things and not on traumatic things. Now, if you're going to tell the truth and bring me into traumatic things, you have got to go. Because alone, I will find sitcoms to watch, I will find popcorn to eat, I will find candy bars to wolf down. I will keep my own consciousness very nicely pointed in nice, happy thoughts. Thank you very much. And if anyone close to me starts to point out any of these dark terrains, I will get rid of them like that. I will get rid of them. Because they're a threat to what? Overwhelming pain. Why is that a threat? Because that's the point where we go into pain management and compulsive and, quote, irrational behavior. It's very rational behavior if you understand trauma. It's just nobody does. So rather than admit the obvious that we are a trauma-illiterate cult and it would be worth our while to study it for a month per citizen, and the whole culture would go up significantly in well-being if we would simply dedicate a month per person to studying trauma some point in our lives, and at least before passing PTSD to the next generation, would be lovely. But we're not going to do it. So we've got a trauma-illiterate cult. Well, how many cults in human history admit that they're cults and they don't know what they're doing? I mean, do the Russians say that we're complete idiots, we don't know what we're doing? Do the Puerto Ricans, say we're complete idiots, we don't? Did the French, did the Iranians, did the Persians, did the Byzantine Empire say, we don't know what we're doing? We're full of shit, and we could really use our people's help to figure it out. And, do we send ambassadors to Denmark to figure out why they're 400% happier than we are? They are. 400%. It's amazing. I won't go into the full statistics here. It's astounding that the average Danish citizen is 400% happier and 400% less susceptible to trauma than the average American. Stunning. Do we send ambassadors to say, tell us what we could do that you're doing, because we want to learn from you? That would be intelligent, be efficient, learn from winners, mentor countries mentoring other countries. Nothing wrong with that, except that cults are profoundly stupid. And one of the ways that they're stupid is they would rather protect the status quo than deal in any way with possible change, because a cult is not about intelligence for the most part. It is about maintaining the consistency of a status quo, however absurd. And this happens even technologically. When I went over to England for the first time at 10 years old, the locks on the door of our 400-year-old house were not 400 years old. They were probably 10, 20 years old, maybe even 5 years old. But they had these giant keys. They looked like Harry Potter keys, big. These keys, enormous. They weighed 10 times more than an American key. They were easier to pick the locks than American locks. They required more metal to make the lock and more metal to make the key than American locks and keys. And American locks and keys had been the way they were for decades. And there were locks and keys like that in the hardware store when you go down to replace your lock. And it's like, do you mean to say that not a single English locksmith has flown over the ocean and said there is a safer, lighter, smaller, cheaper way to build locks that has no downside, and everyone's doing it for decades over here, but simply because we've been doing this for the last 400 years, we are going to continue to do it for another number of, is it decades, hundreds of years? I mean, it's beginning slowly to shift, but there's still, in the traditional cultish, personality of that aspect that likes to fit in and, goody two-shoes to the past, there's still are going to be houses built like, the traditional lock. It's so uncomfortable. Isn't it one? It looks just like the uncomfortable lock I had when I was. Let's do this. Let's have single-paned windows, the authentic type, like they were in the 14th century. This is the true authentic experience. It's like, oh my goodness. It's wonderful to have lose so much heat like they did in the past. And so we do this thing on a cultural level. We don't want to learn. Otherwise, every student, we'd send one student in every class, or at least every state, off around the world. We'd say, who's doing the best in the world at cooking? Oh, the Thai are doing 4 times better than we are? Great. Let's all learn, cook Thai. Oh, they're doing better massage and this and that, and it's heavenly. Oh, my goodness. Oh, they're building sustainable houses over here. They're building, they have much better building codes here. Over here, they have this, and this, and this. They take care of the homeless in this country. They don't have homeless in this country because they don't create it. In Thailand, there are no homeless because there's no government that says you can't build there. If you want to build a little tin hut and live there, you do it. And nobody bothers you. Of course you need a home. They're not fools after a 4,000-year-old culture. 400 years old, we are fools. They're not fools. So they all have houses. And they feel dignity and feel survival and security, etc., much more than an American with 10 to 100 times the money. Well, we don't bother to learn these things. Why not? Because we're afraid of the unknown. And this gets into what? Consciousness control. Because the more pain you're in, the more trauma you've got tucked away behind partitions, the more you've got to control the environment to avoid the unknown. And the more that you've got to control the environment to avoid the unknown, the more you've got to control other people because they are a huge part of the environment. And this, brings us back to this nexus between, I think most psychologists and informed citizens would agree that keeping an individual's pain below the level of extreme reactivity. So, for example, here's a scenario. So you take a newlyweds family and you chop them up with machetes in front of them, and then you give that guy a bazooka and everyone pretends like nothing's going on. You do that to 1,000 men, and after the numbness and awareness goes off as everyone stands by and watches his family chop together pieces with machetes, the vast majority of those men are going to be beyond their pain threshold. They're going to be in overwhelming pain. And this is the shoot-up point. How do you get rid of that pain when no one's helping? When no one gives a damn? When no one prevented it? No one responds? When no one's weeping? When they've dissociated from you, there's just another genocide victim. How do you get rid of the pain? Well, you blow up everyone else. The hatred that you feel towards a sociopathic environment that would do this to you and your family and not respond is intense. And so you go into reactivity. As long as we believe that TV ratings, and they do go up around massacres, school shootings are great for ratings, just so you know, and ratings are great for advertisers. And advertisers will pay more money to the TV commercial, the TV show for coming right after a school shooting because the adrenaline is up. And then if the advertisement is effective at presenting a nice, sexy lady in a green environment with a soap or something right after the violence of a school shooting, your body gets the irrational message that that brand of soap will protect you from violence. Now, the advertisers know that, and so does anyone who has understood advertising psychology. Anyone in government who wishes to understands this. And our attention span is sold in our cult to the highest bidder. And so, being a goal of making money, school shootings are great for business. So, assuming that there is someone in the cult who values the reduction of school shootings or massacres or genocides of this kind more than they value ratings and the dollars those bring into soap commercials or something like that, assuming someone's interested in that, then you will get a response. And you will say that, so-and-so blowing up the neighbors and stuff in response to that is not good. It's not intelligent. And there we come back to the point. You can tell the sophistication of a culture by how efficiently and consciously the culture collaborates to keep all of its minorities below that pain reactive threshold, below the point where they go into fight, flight, and freeze. Now, how intelligent is the United States? 42% of our homeless have PTSD. PTSD is beyond the pain threshold. You are in fight, flight, and freeze. So if you enter a cycle of violence, where, for example, in Marin County, they recently passed a law to stop homeless people sleeping in their car. Then they hired private security companies to drive around the roads to where the homeless, who of course have nowhere to go, and if they're lucky, they've got a car to sleep in because even the car could be broken in. And when you've got PTSD, one of the biggest threats to the homeless is the homeless, because you induce a population, a minority, into a sociopathic state by treating them sociopathically, beginning with the primary message that you are worthless without money, you don't have money, therefore you're worthless. This triggers alarm bells. Because how are you going to survive, feel secure, feel love and belonging and self-esteem if you have no value? And you cannot get value under the rules prescribed by the cult. How are you going to do it? You got to sneak by. You got to this. But now we've got patrol money being spent around to wake up the homeless. Now, if you are sleep deprived and have PTSD, are you more likely to go off the deep end, to feel hostile, or less? Well, do the science. We pretend we're a scientific cult. We systematically violate our own science to spend large amounts of public money to do the exact opposite of what our top trauma experts like Bessel van der Kolk say that we should do. Do the science. You have an incredible amount of self-loathing going on when you systematically induce other people into a traumatic state. And one of the interesting things that I learned and observed from my parents as a teenager, because I would babysit my children, my younger siblings. And my parents were doing their, various shenanigans with all 5 children. It's really good to have 5 children if you don't know how to parent, because then you've got more creativity in the abuse pattern. And in that dynamic, the biggest game, since my parents couldn't have feelings, was to take all their own pent-up feelings and manage to make their children express their feelings that they wanted to disown and didn't want to deal with. And so this is why my younger siblings, and initially myself, was so crazy around my parents. Now, I observed this pattern. You've got to study patterns, not words, when your parents lie. And so I observed the pattern, not what my parents said. My parents were constantly telling all the children that it was their fault and they'd ruined their lives and blah, blah, blah. It's all the children's fault. If they hadn't been born, then none of this would be happening. And of course, they shouldn't have been born. It's not that Dad should have worn a condom, which presumably he had some choice over. The kids shouldn't have been born. They should have been conceived, but then just not been born magically, because you need magical thinking when you're dealing with pain management, when you're in as much pain as my father was. And so in this transference dynamic, the rage, the helplessness, the grief, etc., that is blocked off and repressed in the parent must come out in the child so that the parent doesn't go completely insane. And so they do these little games to rile up this and that and make each child share and express the feelings. And then what the parent does is to relieve the pressure of self-criticism and shame is they then punish the child in the same way they were punished as a child for having those same feelings. So they elicit the feeling and then they punish and shame it. And this keeps the focus of that inner dynamic off the parent's mind. And so I observed this, and by 14 I had figured out how to break the code. And it wasn't very hard because kids want to be good. Kids are great. They want to be good. And it's not hard as long as they're not being sabotaged continually by the grown-ups around them. And so I stopped. I reversed my parents' code systematically at 14 years old and got it to the point where within 30 minutes of my parents leaving the house, the siblings were fabulous kids. And within 5 minutes of my parents coming home, they were delinquents again. And so I told my father this, and he went white. And his response, as most parents, when they have information they're not willing to face and deal with, was simply to do a nonverbal contract with me that he'd leave me alone as long as I didn't ask him to face the truth, which meant that we were both colluding in the betrayal, in the systematic abuse and betrayal psychologically of 4 younger siblings who didn't figure it out yet and who would have been traumatized to understand that their parents were systematically destroying their psyche, bringing them to this point of reactivity so that they could shame them and get the shame that was on the outside. My father left me alone and stopped humiliating me as the benefit of keeping his secret. And that's the deal that I made at 14 years old. I didn't even bother dealing with my mother because when she was too dissociative to know to know the dynamic, and it's a very interesting dynamic, but how I experienced it at the time was she was too dumb to know that she was dumb. But it would upset her to learn that she was dumb. It wouldn't upset her that she was being dumbly or that she was hurting people and blah, blah, blah. It would upset her to break through the fantasy that she was this wonderful, beautiful parent who was doing all these things in this wonderful way. That fantasy was the only thing that protected her from an overwhelming amount of pain. And so out of pity, mingled with disgust, I let her have it. Because she would break down and fall apart when I began taking it away. And it's too much. It's too much to ask even a 14-year-old boy to be responsible for his parents' heart when they have never led an example and been responsible for their own or the child. Where's the template going to come from for that kind of empathy? It doesn't exist. And when dad's waiting in the wings to pounce and throw humiliation and spears at any emotional vulnerability. Now, you can be delinquent and all that, and that's fine. That's creating a nice chaotic noise. Because if you understand that addiction is pain management through the mechanism of compulsively controlling consciousness with the strategy of controlling the environment and with it the people in it, then you understand that my siblings were sacrificed on the altar of pain management, turned into distractions for my parents' feelings, so that my parents did not have to turn their little ego into the domain of their horror. The horror of the cult, the horror of education, the horror of their childhood. This drawing of a car laying over the body, the wheel, center on the back of someone under the car. The car drives over you, front wheel drives over you, then the back wheel gets up on top of your back, right in the center on top of the spine, and stops. You have a reactive, shadow-avoidant person in our culture. You might have a driver get out and run away at this point. I don't want to face. I had a Waldorf teacher that told me at 14 that she hit a child in her Jeep, and her number one impulse was to get away and not be found out, and she drove away from the child that she'd hit. Now, this is a Waldorf teacher. Lots of nice mental ideals. My father was a board of directors of the Cultural Freedom Fund, a director of a currency hedge fund called Gaia Corp, owned a metaphysical bookstore. We're not talking about head stuff here. We're talking about a level of pain that is not being dealt with in our cult. That when that pain threatens to come to consciousness, a Waldorf teacher will drive away from a child that she's just hit with her car. That a father will turn white and sacrifice the psyches of all of his children. On the surface, he's making money to send them to the best schools and blah, blah, blah. Beneath the surface, he is doing whatever it takes to not feel pain. These two programs are not on the same page. In a cult like this, it's not too conceivable or inconceivable I mean, in most cases, the gas would be hit and they'd run off. But anyway, you've got a car laying on someone's back. If they wriggle their back will break. They can't lift a 4,000-pound car off them. They need help. Not just any help. They need help in a quantity, in an intensity capable of counteracting the car. Now, ideally, you jack the car up where it is. You don't keep driving over the body. You jack the car up. And one person with a jack and a couple of people gently pulling the body out with a stretcher, you might save the life. You might save the life. One person cannot do it alone. Now, the heart, mind, and body are octaves of the same energy. You start with an idea, an imagination. It's great. It's an idea. It's an imagination. You have feelings about it. Of all the 60,000 thoughts you have a day, you have feelings about it. Now it's more real. It now exists on two dimensions. An image, a possibility, and a feeling. Now, if the feeling prioritizes the image, the idea, it gets turned into action. So we're dealing with 3 octaves of density. You could say that thoughts multiplied by feelings equals actuality, dense matter. Light matter, denser matter, dense matter. Light energy pattern, thicker energy pattern, very thick, dense energy pattern. Now, it's rather a shame that in our cult, we question the reality of light matter. Oh, that's just in your head. It doesn't matter. Well, the entire fucking world, all the skyscrapers, all the nuclear bombs, all the missiles, all the internet, all the SWAT teams, all the prisons, they were just in someone's head too. And it's rather a pity that when it was just in someone's head, nobody thought to evaluate it and understand it in more detail. Now it's real. And that's part of chauvinism, the inner world, the less visible world, the less dense world. That's feminine. It's not important. That's for girls in my generation, you know, the feelings and things like that. And so we, of course, negate and ignore and dishonor that which is in our head, that which is in our heart, before we take action. Now, this is important to understand, that the human heart is a scientific instrument. It's linked, of course, with our biology. It's not quite as dense as physicality. You think about your mother dying in a horrible car accident, and assuming you had a decent mother, you feel sad at the idea. You feel horrific if you watch it happen before your face in dense matter. You watch it happen a little lighter, you feel sad. That's the teaching. It's like, at this density, it doesn't feel too good. Maybe I shouldn't make it so dense. Maybe I should intervene and see that that doesn't happen. That's the whole purpose of thoughts and feelings, is to test reality at light density before you replicate it in high density. High density having more impact because we've got more sensory perceptions, taste, smell, the whole thing. Now, this is important because we ignore psychological pain. We ignore, meaning every single thing I am talking about here, I have never heard a single person saying it in my entire life. Now, do you have any doubt that this isn't real? That there is no truth, no correlation between these things and reality in things that matter? Or do you have doubt that maybe we're a cult that doesn't want to talk about its most important things? Well, if you don't get to talk about it, if you don't get to think it and feel it and have that matter, like, oh, that's just in your head, then how exactly are you going to avoid all this pain in physicality when you ignore all this pain mentally and emotionally. How are you going to do it? If that's just in your head, so you just take a pill, you see, you feel depressed and miserable. Okay, just take a pill. Don't worry about it. It'll clear up. And then, bam, you're hit with another painful reality, or your outer world keeps getting worse because you keep voting for people that put the same policies in that made it worse before. It's like, I don't know. It's not safe to tell the truth. We've all learned that. But, I don't know. I don't know what to do here because we're not analyzing it. Now, there's not anyone, even in our level of stupidity, that would argue that this person can lift this car off them. No. So we're going to get a jack, we're going to get a tow truck, we're going to try and raise the car. We may do a great job, we may do a crappy job, whatever. But we do get the someone laying on their stomach with a heavy car on their back, hardly able to breathe with broken ribs and stuff, can't get out of that car. But we do not make the connection in an emotionally and mentally illiterate culture that the physical and emotional body, that the mental and emotional body of an individual can be ramroded, can be pressed in the exact same way psychologically. That a 2-year-old who is trying to tell the truth, I need this, at a mother who hates him for needing it. Now, of course, the understandable reality is fine. Mom's frantically on the phone trying to keep the job that she's about to lose because she's pregnant. Because in a sophisticated culture like ours, where money is more important than people, and money is more important than the future of the culture, we should, of course, punish women for having babies. And the way to do that is very simple. You just say, okay, we're going to pay you based on performance. You now have a baby. Your performance is not as good as this man who didn't just have a baby. Now, it's nothing personal. It's all about money. And we can't afford to keep you in your job. Which means, of course, that you and your baby will be reclassified as a loser and put on the street because you had the audacity to perpetuate the species. You dumb fool. And you didn't have the intelligence to marry a rich guy and tell him whatever little stuff he needed to make him feel important so that he would marry you, you dumb fool. So we're sorry so mom's trying to hold on to her job, and the kid is trying to get a mom in a cult that doesn't offer maternity leave. We could learn a few things from Denmark, where mother and father have maternity and paternity leave that is fully paid, that is required by law, and where you're looked at a little bit suspiciously as a man if you don't take it. Really? You're the kind of guy that thinks money is more important than your son, eh? Well, you're an idiot. We'll think carefully about having you as a social influence. So you've got 1 year of paid maternity leave by law. Well, of course, in Denmark, that baby is not facing starvation and deprivation and and he's not facing a traumatized mother. He's learning regulation to a calm mother. So he's learning what calmness feels like, and that's what this cult is about. Whereas our babies are learning what stress is about because they attune to their mother, who is adrenaline addicted, in a cult that is constantly attacking her for having the audacity to be a biological reality. Chimpanzees are not doing this. We are in the United States. This psychological pressure for that infant, dealing with the hatred. You see, hatred comes with helplessness, it comes with hurt, and it comes with sociopathic environments. You're helpless when you're deeply hurt and scared and no one responds. Now, if you tell your boss, I am deeply hurt and I'm deeply scared, and I want you to change your attitude, your behavior, and your work policies so that I'm not scared and deeply hurt. Because hurting other human beings is not a good idea. It's not civilized. It's not intelligent. In the long term, it's not good for business. It's a terrible idea, and you are a dumb and uninformed boss for not knowing it in a dumb and uninformed culture who refuses to know it. Could you mind changing that? She will get fired or set up to be attacked for telling the truth. So she's got to put on her sex appeal, right? My mom would do that with the state troopers. She had a model body, so she would always arrange her breasts and get out of speeding tickets. And that's what you learn in a sexist cult like ours. You got to give something that the power structure wants. It's not about what's right. Perhaps my mom, being as ditzy as she was, shouldn't have been allowed to be on the road or should have had higher insurance premiums. But who cares about the truth when you've got state troopers who want to look at boobs? And you've got women trained by the media, by observation, etc., to understand that those state troopers don't give a damn about you. They give a damn about feeling powerful, feeling important, da-da-da-da-da-da. So you got to play a little bit to their egos. You're a politician, da-da-da. Your dad and mom don't care about you. You got to play to their egos. What do they want? They want, okay, well, give them this little thing. When you're terrified of being a bad mom, when you're terrified of losing your job, when you're hurt, when you can't sleep, when you can't eat well because you can't sleep, when you feel rage that in this situation of da-da-da, your boyfriend wants to have sex with you and is going to dump you for someone else if you don't do this and that. When you feel all that, and your 2-year-old screams that he actually wants a healthy, intelligent mother in a healthy and intelligent culture, it gets beyond the tolerance point of the mother. She stops being a mother. She becomes a murderer. She wants to kill that baby. She hates it. This fucking thing. And the child picks that up in the facial expressions, in the tone, in the energy, the giant, the infant. And it freezes. It goes into the reptilian brain. It freezes. When that hits it, it's too big to process. And it needs help psychologically to come back into the empathic regions of the brain and not just dissociate in that whole area. We are a cult of profoundly mentally and emotionally sick human beings because of the amount of dissociation and pain from these types of things. And there is no point in that 2-year-old's life. I can attest to that as a 44-year-old U.S. male. There is no point in my life where a single grown-up, let alone an adult, a single grown-up is going to come up to me and say, wow, you were born in this cult. There have got to be unimaginable pains and hurts that are just too difficult for you to deal with. Yes. And those are going to, keep haunting you. Yes. And they're going to take a toll on you physically. Yes. And they're going to come out explosively, emotionally from time to time and this and that. Yes. And we're going to get you some help. And we're going to do this and this and this and this. And we're committed to lifting this car off of your psychological body until you can take a breath of freedom for the first time since you were 2, since the first time since you were 1, since the first time when you were 6. Wow, that's an intelligent cult. That's people who care. Really? There are people that say that my feelings, my feminine side, is worth the 10 hours it would take for a group of knowledgeable people to help with that. They're going to all gather around. They're going to lift that car off me. They're going to move it to the side, and they're going to put it down. They're going to do that for me because I'm in desperate need, and I've been crying out for that so loudly, I had to tune that part of me out. I had to shut my 2-year-old infant in a cavern below ground because I couldn't deal with the screaming and run a functional modern life. And that 2-year-old's been down there in hell. If you don't think this is hell, the joke's on you. It's not a matter of being thrown into hell because you didn't do what your little cult told you to do. You're in hell because you did. This is hell. Now, and we understand it because we're there. That terror of that thrown into that pit of fire in that dark place, we're already there. What we're terrified of is the ego joining the parts of us that are already there. That's the dread. Your ego is no longer going to have cocaine, is no longer going to have bimbos throwing their bodies away, trying to look important in a penthouse. Your ego is no longer going to have Maseratis, uncomfortable noisemakers that guzzle up gasoline and get high praise in our cult. Your ego is going to be stuck beyond the wall of unimaginable pain that you and your cult conspired to create and then leave there undealt with. And you're going to end up where you already are if you stop compulsively looking the other way. And I will do anything to avoid feeling what I'm actually feeling, seeing what I'm actually seeing, being where I actually am in some part of my psyche. So the psyche takes all of who we are and it chops up bits and says, throw that in the rubbish heap. Nah, that's too effeminate. No, that doesn't sound very cool. Throw that out. The psyche chops, the cult chops the psyche down into some semblance of something and says, oh, there, you look good. And we have whole shows on the media all designed to take the unattractive guy and turn him into someone who's hot and sexy. Except it makes absolutely no sense if you look at the science of it. It's just what the cult says is good. And you have coaching on how to be that, not to be yourself. And you certainly don't teach the cult, in a sociopathic cult, how to honor the self and the individual. You teach the individual how to chop parts of themselves off and bury them to please a dissociated cult that is too dumb to know that the parts that it is chopping off to fit its mandate of conformity are some of the most important integral parts of the psyche. And in the waste heap of the insane and disorganized mind is the sanity that would make the cult whole. The 102 metric tons of garbage that an American citizen is going to produce and throw into a hole in the ground is representative of the tonnage, of the proportional tonnage of thoughts and feelings that are unacceptable in the cult and are going to be thrown on a waste heap called the human shadow. Your kindness, it's a little bit much here. And we are fascinated. It's very telling, whether it's Curb Your Enthusiasm or Seinfeld or whatever. They're all thick cult dynamics. It's all about this cult line. And it should be focused on. But so often what we do is we watch these things, it's like, yeah, you're right. Elaine was too emotional. What an idiot, or this. We go along with the cult, and you end up with something as dry and pathetic as Seinfeld, as somehow the winner, because he's got the little cute butt, because he's sarcastic, because he's witty, because he knows where the cult line are, because he does absolutely nothing other than wander around doing absolutely nothing. And that's exactly the best pain management strategy our cult has come up with. So we've got whole generations aspiring to that. And he's pulling it off nicely on TV, of course. In reality, he has to deal with his depression and bitterness and the fact that he's made all of this money being an icon of stupidity. You know, that's at some level, that's got to grate on the parts of you that want to come out into something more real. You need help. You need help to heal the psychological pain. To heal the psychological pain that is too heavy, that if you move under it, it'll crack your bones. It's too much for the ego structure to deal with. Now, once the ego structure is dead and you're back into the entire psyche and the soul, that can deal with it. As a concept, but we're talking about the ego and that terror, having felt dissociated to a large extent from the larger whole. The ego's terror is of dissolution, of not existing, of not mattering. We need help. And the other thing that this is a really important image is to understand the corresponding nature between weight. So this is an example of weight. You know, if what you're dealing with is this in your face, you are stuck. You have no sense of time because you can't look on the right and the left of the screen. This is your consciousness. You're in a black void. You're in a depression. You can't see. Now, as you get a little bit of perspective, okay, now you can work with it. But once it's got you there, you need help. You need someone who's outside of the hand that is obscuring your vision. The traumatic wave that has eaten you alive. It's gone over you. And so many of our horror films and all this are about this, because this is the greatest dread of the human ego, to be trapped in a timeless void, alone, banished, and hated by the cult, where everyone would rather you die than come out of that horror and tell the truth, where you are becoming that which everyone fears, because everyone in a pain-avoidant cult fears this. They would rather die or kill their own relatives than feel these feelings. Now, when you understand that, then you can understand the parts in a child that feel betrayed. Because the parts in the child that got thrown on the rubbish heap knew the truth, that their parents hated them, that their parents would kill them rather than feel those feelings. Those parts knew, and that's why they had to be thrown on the rubbish heap. Those truths can never be spoken at the dinner table. They can never be spoken. Now, you also realize that when you've got too much weight, physical, emotional, or mental weight, you either break or you are stuck. You're not slithering out of there until you get help or that weight moves on. That's the law of physics. We're dealing science here, not cult dogma. And so you're not going to grow. Everything grinds to a halt. And we deal with age regression a lot around trauma because that's exactly what happens. A high participant is reduced to 3 years old by a pattern of influence and conspiracy, etc., that reenacted the incest, the violation, in a way that took her 40, 50-year-old psyche into the deepest horror of being 3-year-old and betrayed in everyone around her, turning their backs and seeing her as the problem. They didn't want to go into their shadow, so they couldn't go in there with her. So now she's stuck. Her ego has been yanked into this domain of age regression, and as a 3-year-old, she can't face the outer reality that's triggered her out there. And the 3-year-old doesn't get to grow up because a car is sitting over her emotional body with the threat that as soon as she gets out there, she has the rage and hatred of her family. The rage and hatred of her family who do not want the truth of that 3-year-old's incest to come out. Why? Well, for one, Dad's bringing in the money. Everyone want to give up their Nintendo game just so little 3-year-old doesn't get incest? Everyone want to give up just so that she has the dignity of being able to be known in her pain, in her horror, in her confusion? In a sociopathic, materialistic cult like ours, what's being betrayed isn't all that important. The psyche, the sanity, the dignity of a human being. It's not that important. The Nintendo game, you see, Dad bought that. Dad bought that. It was a nice little bribe. You see, Dad stopped humiliating me and left me alone when I agreed not to push the fact that he was systematically inducing insanity with a profound degree of cruelty and a traumatic pattern of delinquency in each of the younger siblings. That's the deal when you have giants and you have little ones who have no legal authority. My father called the police on me because I punched him for breaking a boundary. I'd set a very, very important boundary, having established that my things were the only things that were sane and safe. I could not have the rampant stealing, breaking, disregard for things going on and stay sane. So it's an important boundary. You don't come into my room. My parents don't know how to honor boundaries, and so I put a lock on the door. And my father kicked the door down. And I told him, if you cross this boundary, I am going to punch you. If you don't, no problem. This is the boundary. Now, I've never been in a fight. I'd never hit my father before. Even my younger siblings, when I tormented them, I knew how to do it psychologically because that's what my father taught me. And of course, he taught me that it wasn't torture, it was love, which is why I could maintain a sense of innocence about tormenting people. It's like, I'm just doing what Dad does. What's the big deal? So he crosses the boundary, give him a quick punch. That's it. 1 second. Don't go past. Well, he has a fit about that. How dare you? That is my house. And so he calls the police. And we have this long discussion. I actually have it on an audio recording. I listened to it recently. So I'm probably 15, 16, in that range. And my dad's ranting about how he, and how, And the policeman, it's actually a policewoman, she's trying to get me to agree not to hit my parents if they hit me or if they break my boundaries. The only boundary being, don't come in my room and take my stuff. That's the only boundary. And I said, you understand, policewoman, I don't want to hit my parents. I don't want to be hit by them. I do not want them coming in my room. I don't want them stealing my things. I don't want them breaking them. I do not want anything to do with these people. And this is my one kind of resource. Now, my mother will sometimes hit me when I go to the kitchen to eat. And so I've told my mother that I will hit her to the same degree that she hits me, not to my body weight because I'm bigger than my mother. And so I could easily knock her out on the floor and kill her if I wanted to. But I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to let her know what it feels like to be hit by mirroring her violence. So if she slaps me on the face, I'll slap her on the same face, not at my intensity, at her intensity, because she's not very strong. So that's how I've trained my mother not to hit me. You understand? She will hit me without that boundary. She doesn't have the integrity, the inner control, even the honesty, because she's all interested in spiritual channels and blah, 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 to understand any of this. She's just acting out unconsciously, and she gets conscious when I hit her back. So I've had to do that 2 times now, and my mother has stopped hitting me. My father I've only had to hit once, and he has, thankfully, decided he doesn't want to be hit again, so he's called in the police to bully me so that he can start violating my room and drive me crazy the way he's doing to everyone else. Well, the policewoman said, this is your father's house and da-da-da, and it's like, yes, I'm in a fucked up cult that has no interest in my siblings' sanity. Well-being and all that would tell me I'm very lucky to have a fucked up cult like this. I'm very lucky to have dysfunctional parents who send me to private schools with equally dysfunctional teachers. And here I am. You're not coming in. Well, the policewoman, her whole focus was on trying to convince me on an utter lie, which is that if I wouldn't hit them, there would be no violence in the house, when the exact opposite was true. I had to hit my mother twice at her intensity, and she never hit me again. I had to hit my father once. I didn't have to hit my siblings because they were better behaved than my parents. Oh, and my parents were, meeting with high executives and, and this and that, and wonderful, intelligent people and charity givers and da-da-da-da-da. This is the insanity of our cult. There is not a single grown-up in this entire narrative who once asks or wants to see the cruelty that is visceral on my father's face. How dumb do you have to be? How numb do you have to be before you can look at one of the most unhappy men I've ever met? One of the most miserable and in pain men that I've ever met. One of the most violent and self-hating and sad men that I've ever met. And ignore the facial data that's all over his face and talk about how smart he is. How committed to willful ignorance do you have to be as a grown-up? When monkeys can read faces better than this. You start squinting at a monkey like this, and they don't stick around if if they understand that you can kill them and all that. No. Babies read faces, but we tune them out for socio-political agendas that have a primary focus of ignoring the vast well of pain that rests right beneath our cult, waiting for it to either get big enough for someone to deal with this. And I think what's going on with our homeless and our poor and our young people, as I watch what's going on, is a mirror of what was going on with my parents. I think our government and our people in general do not want to deal with their shadow. They don't want to deal with the bits that have been chopped off and thrown on the rubbish heaps. They're beautiful pieces and they're ugly pieces. They don't want to deal with their hate. They don't want to deal with their rage. They don't want to deal with their envy. They don't want to deal with their murderous sociopathic impulses. They don't want to deal with their sexual violation, their desire to be killed or murdered or raped or rape. They don't want to deal with any of that. Nor do they want to deal with their transcendent love, their kindness, their beauty, their magnificent creativity. They don't want to deal with that which is outside the cult's little band. So we've chopped off the good stuff and we've chopped off the bad stuff, and we've got this little mediocre band running along the middle. And I think that in order not to go entirely numb, we turn our homeless, we turn our minorities, we turn our poor black women, one of the lower points in the cultural pecking order, and that we turn our minorities, our dysfunctional children, our highly feminized men, our homosexuals. We've somehow gotten them in because homosexuals have been good for business and proved to be highly politically active. And so, you've got to give them credit, if they're going to get you votes and all that. It's not the people that are important, it's the votes and the money. And so they've been pretty good at mobilizing the culture with all of that. But our minorities are being turned into the shadow expressions that we deny in our cult. And we are terrorizing them. And I'm documenting that with a woman right now who's being consistently set up to fail. And the extremes, they're having people tail her because she has murder evidence and stuff about some of and the government agencies. They don't want to be touched. They don't want to have anything to do, but they've got to manage this group and depersonalize them, much as Hitler and the Nazis depersonalized the Jews. When you cannot deal with a region in the psyche, you will go insane if you do not externalize that by creating a minority group in your cult that you demonize and partition behind a horrific wall that mirrors the inner world. You will go insane. So the more we suppress the parts in ourselves that are put behind these walls, the parts in ourselves that are not politically correct, that are not rich, that will never be rich because they're too kind. They will give money to people who need help and they'll smile and they'll be happy, like, oh, it made you happy, that's good. Those bits go behind the wall. And you'll find some of the kindest people in these minority groups, and they're also behind the wall. It's like, why are these people being singled out for such cruelty? They're more creative. They're more honest. They're more real. What is it that we're putting behind the wall? Well, we're doing it to millions of Americans in prison, millions of Americans who are homeless, millions of fatherless children, millions of addicts, tens of millions of addicts. And we're putting it behind the wall. And what we punish is not what's happening. What we punish is getting caught. We punish getting caught in the dynamic of what's happening. So without help, this doesn't get lifted off, and you have a stuck energy. It's called regression. And until there is help at a level capable of lifting the vehicle off of the back of the psyche, you have permanent regression. You have dissociation. And you have the ability for your environment to trigger you back to that moment, which your body, you've escaped physically, but then someone does something like touch you inappropriately and whatever, and then suddenly you're right back to 3 years old because it's the same. You never dealt with the trauma. The real trauma was that nobody did anything about it. There's no one to go to. The more people you talk to and ask for help, the more punished you will be. That is the definition of an ignorant, shame-based cult. The more people you ask for help, the more punished you will be. That is the definition of a shame-based, ignorant cult. It's ignorant because it will spread. All untreated disease, mentally, emotionally, and physically, spreads. And it does. We have the data, despite our tremendous effort to avoid the data. You have no idea how much resistance there would be to sending a blank email to all the kids in the country, asking them at 8 years old, have you seen this, and nobody's ever going to know. But we will know the metadata of our country. Are your parents safe? Do you feel this, And not to please anyone. We actually want to know about you. And you're not going to get in trouble because we're going to hide it from your parents. You're not going to be beaten, humiliated, looked at with fearful eyes that tell you your parent is going to fall apart emotionally if they realize they're one of those bad parents. We're not going to tell them. We're just going to gather the data. This project is free, by the way. Emails? We already have the emails of all these kids and stuff. Just a request from a president. Could all the 8-year-olds in our country tune into this app sometime when their parents aren't around and whatever, and do this data? No one will ever know your identity, but we will know how much incest is going on in America. We will know how scared our 8-year-olds are. We will know. And we can publicly apologize for the fact of our inadequacy of a cult to raise parents and blah, 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 blah. We will not do it. It's free. It's intelligent, so we won't do it. Because that would mean taking a stand for the child's sanity. That would mean those 8-year-olds wouldn't feel alone. And there could be a news program by a psychologist talking to everyone, these are the statistics. 1 in 7 of you are going to have this, 1 in 2 of this. That's millions of people. And here's how they cope with it. These are people who are older than you. These are people who are older than you. They're 14, and it's still hard at 14. These are 20 and 30-year-olds. These people, this one committed suicide because no one could talk about it. This one managed to find a good lover, and that's hard to find in our culture because it's not considered manly in a sociopathic cult to have needs and desperation if you were molested as a boy. So you have all kinds of American women saying they're not going to fuck you unless you're cool and hot, which means sociopathic and not needy, which means we don't want to hear the parts of you that are very legitimately needy from sustained, intense cruelty. And so here's a program for you. And this is how the best of America gets by. These people are able to get therapy. It's going to take you a while because you've been abused and your income may be lower and stuff. But by 40, these people, if you hang in, were able to get some therapy. Now you're going to have crappy therapists. But these therapists are helped a lot. These over here didn't. And that's what we want you to know at 8 years old. We want you to know that you can make it and that there is some segment in the cult that cares about you, enough to do a free email and a couple of hours of television for public interest that actually helps people, unequivocally helps people. Now, if you want to see insanity and an outraged cult, just propose this and watch all the people line up to kill this idea. Talk to a senator about it. It's not an American thing to do, to tell the truth. Thank you, ma'am, for your suggestion. Let's get rid of that. And the parents will be the most outraged of the lot. If you do this to our children, if you tell them the truth, we will never vote for you again. We will kill you. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. Because you are killing your children. You are killing your children, and that doesn't bother you. What bothers you is facing this shame, this dynamic. If you want to see the ugly side of your friends, bring this up. Talk about this. If you want to see your New Age spiritual teachers waffle around, you see, Rajneesh went into silence when it came down to the critical thing and then blamed his subordinates. You want to see incredibly flaky and dysfunctional behavior. Deal with this and bring metadata to light and confront the circle with its own data. Confront the psyche, the ego, with the truth of the data. The data is not lying, and it's not good or bad. It is data about the sophistication of the algorithm running the decision-making protocol. It's that simple. Great intelligent decision-making protocols have relatively low levels of pain. Fabulous and perfect protocols have no pain. So it's the physical world, the human physical world, is not a perfect system. There is an element of pain, which is why transcendence is such an important thing. But this is how you lift the weight off, and there is a mechanism. And you can measure the intelligence of your community, your family, your therapist, your country, your culture, by how effectively people who have vehicles on them emotionally, mentally, or physically are having them lifted off until they can be independent and help. Once the vehicle is off of them, they can take care of themselves. But it is essential to understand that there are emotional and mental vehicles that are way heavier than any physical vehicle. I mean, they're not way heavy. I mean, if you've got a 20 million ton tank sitting right on top of your body and you're broken into smithereens, yeah, there are emotional vehicles that are that heavy. And there is emotional abuse that is a misuse of force. It's the dishonor of the limits of the mental emotional body. It's the dishonor of the limits of the mental emotional body. to have, for example, a whole group. For example, when the Human Awareness Institute facilitators all ganged up on me to say that sexual abuse by Peter Sandhill was not a high issue. That's the weight of my community, of my primary source of love and belonging. That's the weight of all of the authority that I've given them in a regressed therapeutic state. So I'm in a disintegrated, regressed state induced by a high dose of psychedelics pushed on me by Peter Sandhill, and then failed to integrate by Peter Sandhill, and then denied and shamed by Peter Sandhill, who then asks for deep help in a traumatic state. And when you ask for deep help in a traumatic state, what you're asking for is, please help me stay as a human being. Please help me stay up here. Please help me stay up here where I can be human and believe that people care about people. Now, when I get the legal contract from Jason Weston saying, Dane, I want you to promise never to tell anyone, never to sue high, money before people, lies before truth, invisibility before integration. And I want you to know that sexual abuse by a high facilitator is not a high issue because we are a public nonprofit that is committed to teaching love, intimacy, into me you see, and healthy sexuality. And we take money as a public nonprofit to protect public interest ahead of you. We put the public's interest first. Now, you are a client who has attended 100 high events, who has hired 4 facilitators, who has made donations to high, who has helped other people go to high workshops. You are a client, you are a participant, you are a member of the public, you are a therapeutic patient. And we are here to tell you that our mission statement of creating a world in which everyone wins does not include helping lift this car off of your body. In fact, we are going to get into the car, adding the weight of our insanity, adding the incredible weight of our own fear, our fear of being seen, our fear of losing money. We're going to add that emotional weight to the car. We're going to use your emotional loyalty to us. There's a dynamic with loyalty, which means that to see where it is here. Well, I'll just explain it to you. It's on here somewhere, but there's a dynamic with loyalty where it's a human need to survive, feel secure, feel love and belonging, to have self-esteem. Now, this is a need. Okay, so let's get real here. Let's put our noses here and tell me how much you don't have any needs, right? And let's cut off the oxygen. Let's cut off the drinks, because you have no needs. You're independent, right? And security about being able to live, that's a need as well. Love and belonging is a need. In a pack mammalian species, you do not survive on your own. You take an infant at 1 year old and throw it out in the jungle, and unlike the story of Mowgli, that child is eaten and rotten within a few days. And it's food. You do not survive alone. Now, the one thing that we have the freedom of as grown-ups, maybe adults, the one thing that we have the freedom around as grown-ups is, who do we trust to participate with our need to survive, to feel secure, to have love and belonging, and have self-esteem? Who do we trust? You're not going to have a lot of self-esteem, by the way, if you have a humiliating partner who beats the shit out of you every day. You're just not. You're not going to have a high level of self-esteem. The amount of hatred that is coming towards you, unable to defend if you can't, and to some extent that's reality that you're there. Meaning, the amount of abuse that you're experiencing is to some extent correlated with the fact that if you had real preference, you would not choose to be abused that way. And so when you stay there, you're to some extent saying, I need this person often for love and belonging. Sometimes they're nice to me. And if I leave, I have no one. And then my trauma comes up, because how will I survive alone as a pack mammalian? My body is telling me a deep truth. The deer that moves away from the herd is the one preyed on by the lion. The monkey that sleeps alone a mile away from the herd doesn't get the warning that danger's coming, is pecked off by hyenas, etc., etc. And so our body, 5 billion years of evolution, are saying, stay in the pack, stay in the pack, stay in the pack. Now, in our culture, we have a tremendous amount of freedom to choose the pack of a nature, meaning we can move to some extent. We can go to this workshop or that workshop or this group or this work group. But once you pick someone, you're going to be married to Joe. And you're married, and you break your arm. And Joe doesn't like weak people because he's a good American, and so he says, come on, get over with it, and humiliates you for needing his help. Oh gosh, you couldn't even do that, And so you have now made your choice. This is a vulnerability. You need love and belonging. You need survival and security. Now, you can pick this, but you don't really necessarily know who Joe is around a broken arm. Or what if you broke your back? And Joe decides that, he'd like to be more sexually active. So he gets a divorce. And you can't work with a broken back because you were a sports coach. And there you are. And you go down and down. And first your love and belong, your self-esteem goes down because you realize the person didn't love you. He just wanted to fuck you. So he can't fuck you, so off he goes. So is that all I'm valuable? So your self-esteem plummets. Your love and belonging plummets because he leaves you. Your friends in a busy, addicted American culture don't come by to visit Mrs. Broken Back very often. So your love and belonging implodes and you realize, oh my gosh, I'm not really safe. And you can't work, and then you become a loser and you get thrown on the street because you can't pay your rent. And then everyone avoids you because they don't want to feel guilty about behaving sociopathically. Meaning at the very moment when you needed the most help in a sociopathic cult, most of your, quote, friends disappear. Why? Because they're not interested in being friends. They're interested in feeling pleasure and avoiding pain. And now that you're in pain, you're no longer a good drug for them. You're no longer making witty remarks. Why? Because you're in agony. Well, I didn't really care about you. I wanted witty remarks. You helped me get up beyond my pain threshold. Now that you're no longer good for that, I'm going to dispose of you. And there's pain in that. So now you've got emotional pain and psychological pain on top of the physical pain. And you don't have a choice in that moment because you can't go out and do the peppy social thing to make new friends. You're stuck. But why would you want to? It's so pointless. If this is how friends behave when you really need them, why the fuck would you put on an act when you're angry and hurt that you're in a cult like this? Why would you put on an act to make more of those types of people when you understand that they're not interested in you or your well-being? They're interested in the act that you're putting on. So you have to abandon yourself to put on the act. Then they like the act, but not you. Because it's hard to breathe. Because you're scared. Because you're alone. Because you're lonely. Because you're hurt and you're mad. And you feel unworthy of being loved because people are abandoning you right and left. Well, Seinfeld's on TV. I've got to go. I've got something to do. What exactly have you got to do? Well, I'm practicing my tennis thing so that I can do this, so I can do the. It's like, wow, they're really urgent things, aren't they? Yeah. Oh, I'd love to be able to help you, buddy. Love to be able to just, it's like, do I have to explain it? Do I have to explain it? You've broken the cult's taboo. You're being real. This was never about you. I didn't have anything to do with you because of you. I'm not leaving you because of you. It's about the cult. It's about these little laws that we're never going to write down exactly. We're never going to teach these to high school. That would help keep our teenagers sane. These are the unwritten laws of your parents. Let's examine them. Now, don't pay attention to what your parents say. Watch what they do. So, okay, I want all of you to talk about shame and report your parents' body language next week. Okay? Let's see. How many parents were delighted and said, wow, that was a really I was hoping that by this generation, we'd have a generation that talked about the reality of feelings, would talk about their feminine side, that would honor the feminine in every man and woman. And you are the first generation of this family to talk about shame. Okay, so how many? Okay, nobody did that. Okay. How many smiled, at least, and didn't say anything nice, but they smiled? How many parents looked terrified? Oh, okay. All right. It's like, something useful. Teach our children something useful to deal with reality as we prepare them for the wide insanity of our larger cult. And so there's this car dynamic is really key to understand, because no one's getting out from under that car without help. And we kill people this way. We kill lifetimes, we kill spirits, we kill soul, we kill innocence. The body, the physical body, may not be under the car. It may just be the heart and the mind. It's gone dead. You can't feel anymore. It's a zombie. And it's actually interesting if we look on TV today and explore media as a composition. If we look at particularly fictional media, if we just look at media and we say that I'm going to watch 1,000 hours of everything that's out there, you will get a better sense if you take it all literally. In other words, a zombie movie, let's look at all the zombies we're dealing with in our cult. Okay, that's real. Much more real than if you ask people, are they a zombie? They'll say no. But they'll say it without thinking. And they'll say it without feeling. They'll be too bored to discuss it. Oh, I see, you're not a zombie. Ah, interesting. Are there any idiots out there? Oh, no, we're all above average. Or you have very smart people claiming to be idiots. It's a bizarre thing. The most highly intelligent people, I'm dumb, I'm stupid, etc. It's like, why do you still have to protect mom and dad from your intelligence? Why do you still have to protect mom and dad from your intelligence? Who gives a shit? If they'd rather sacrifice you and your future and your intelligence to avoid looking inadequate, they are inadequate. So let them go. That wasn't love. That was destroying your future to make them feel a little better for a few hours. That's pain management. It's not love. And this is why this threshold is so viral and so important to track in a culture. How much of what you're doing is being done out of panic, fear, dread, shame, and pain to avoid getting into this terrain where the cumulative impact of pain is too much to deal with, and how much of what you're doing is truly a joy, as opposed to, I'm going to be judged if I don't say it is a joyful thing because I belong to a positive mental attitude group. Now, one of the important things to be aware of, because it's a mechanism without which it's sometimes hard, it's easy to feel like, I don't see how this all fits together, is we have what's called a cult horizon within the psyche. And so above that horizon is stuff that can be articulated and spoken about and is acknowledged, etc., within the cult. You can say, hey, how are you? And you can say, you're fine. That's above the cult horizon. And you can say, what did you do? Oh, I went snowboarding, and then I went this, and then I bought a new iPad. Oh, isn't that amazing in a materialistic cult like ours? You know, it's like, wow, amazing. But you can't say I sat down and tried to deal with the family shame system. It's not below the cult horizon. The family shame system doesn't exist. The cult horizon is nothing to do with the totality of reality. It is the line drawn within the psyche below which stuff cannot be talked about. We don't mention that at dinner table. No, don't go there. I'm not going to even say where there is. You know. And you know from my eyes that that's a bad place to go. Now, I'm not going to explain why my eyes do that, because that would be telling. That would be shedding the family secret, right? But you know. And I knew from my mother. Those eyes say, don't go there. Every 2-year-old knows that, and they've been trained at 2 years old, don't go there, don't go there. And you have the occasional whack if that eyes aren't enough. Just to remind you that, okay, do you want a whack? Do I have to whack you? Because you shouldn't have gone there, and you're so dumb, you know, you just did, you know. The cultural horizon. Now, we put most of our deepest pain below the cultural horizon, and we're so delighted with these chipper, dissociative 80-year-olds who are just chipping along. I had one of these clients, and her daughter lived with her. She was 85 or so. Her arthritis was so thick around her fingers, she could barely move. She could not explore and talk about any number of ideas. But she had been nicely pruned and choreographed to focus on positive little things. And her daughter was her endless cheerleader. And so 80-year-old grandma would say, well, isn't it nice the grass is growing today? And her daughter would say, see, look how positive she is at 85 years old. Look at her, it's wonderful. And I'd say, how's your arthritis or anything? No, nothing wrong with me today. And she'd had this little sliver of reality where everything could look great in that little sliver. And that little sliver was wonderful. But nothing could be talked about that didn't fit into that little sliver. I'm a positive person because I ignore the homeless. I ignore the lying on TV. I ignore this, I ignore this, I ignore this, I ignore this. I can focus on grass growing. Thank you very much. And these people, the cult just puts them up on a good salt of the earth American. Even when she's 80, in fact, she cheerfully died. It was wonderful. And so this, everything can be true above the event horizon, and everything that I'm saying can be true that's below the cult horizon. Not because it's an either-or reality. There's just a line in the cult that says you can't think this, so you can't say it, because if you say it, you'd think it, right? And you can't feel this, not in the polite society. Not if you know what's good for you, not if you don't want to be shamed, fired, blah, blah, blah. You can't do it. So this is the cult horizon, and it's important to understand. And this horizon is expressed kind of more vertically here, where you have the relational, emotional, feminine domain, which is here. And then you have the individual, mental, external, physical, masculine terrain that's out here. And we'll get to this, but within this domain of the cult within this domain of the psyche, it's taboo in the cult, but everyone has it. And so, one of the reasons we're so afraid of relationship is real relationships take you into this domain of the psyche that's beyond the cult horizon. And nobody wants to go there. Nobody wants to be caught there. Nobody wants to be shamed in that dynamic. But I wanted to talk about the circle of addictive abuse because I am an addict, meaning I've been managing pain since as young as I can remember. 60% of my entire life has been spent on activities to get out of this terrain or to avoid it. The terrain in which I know that I will do anything possible to avoid feeling that bad and avoid the fear of expecting to be alone and lonely and shamed and banished forever in that state of the psyche below the pain horizon, where so much of the loneliness will be that everything I say from that place will be shamed and taboo and I will not exist because it's below the event horizon. So 60, maybe even 75% of my entire conscious ego has been spent trying not to end up in this domain in the psyche because I don't know what to do with it, because I don't want to be left there, because I don't want to be punished for being there, because I don't want to be put in the lie that pretends that I'm the only one there, that pretends that this is not going on in the subconscious and of the entire cult, which is the pretense. When I go there consciously, people look at me with fear and leave hurriedly. And they pretend that if they get away from me, they're going to get away from this pain. Now, I found this particularly interesting because our cult is so afraid of pain that often the pain that I'm referencing isn't actually primarily in me. I see the pain in the life and in the repressed feelings of the person I'm talking to. So I see their pain, and it seems unhealthy that they're avoiding it. And I want to let them know they don't have to avoid it with me. I'm willing to go there with them. And so I'll talk about their pain as if it's mine, because it's not hard to do. We've all had tons of pain. But I know that I'm emphasizing the bits of my pain that are really about their pain. And I'm maybe even exaggerating so that they have a certain sense of familiarity, so that they know that they are not alone in that pain. This is something that I do because it hurts to see people in that amount of pain. Now, as I own what is essentially their pain, meaning I'm seeing something in them that's making me feel sad, and I'm wanting to respond to that, but they're in denial. And so I've got to bring it to consciousness, because how can you say, gee, I'm so sorry, if they're in denial? I mean, you can't go up to my dad, he's dead now, but you can't go up to my dad and say, wow, your face is one of the most unhappy, lonely faces I have ever seen. Now, who gives a shit that you're brilliant? Who gives a shit that you can make money? Who gives a shit? I care about that pain. How can I help that pain? I don't know exactly where it is because you won't talk about it. But it sounds like you had, an alcoholic mother, this, that, and the other. He will have a fit. And you just watch him, and it's like, wow, you don't understand how bizarre this is. But he will wiggle out of it somehow. He'll glare at you. I remember trying to love him one time, and he ran this along for 45 minutes. No way to love him, no way to acknowledge, and deal with the pain. So you've got to bring it to consciousness and then share it before you can respond to it. You got to love. You have to see, you are in pain, and I want to respond to it. I am in pain, and I'd like you to respond to it. We are in pain, and let's do something about it. You can't do that with we are not in pain, so what should we do about it? You've got to bring it to consciousness. And so I'll sometimes lead in a group or in an individual thing with pain, because I seem to be less afraid of it than most people. I don't have more of it than most people. I'm just more aware and less afraid of it. In part because seeing it keeps me alive. You know, if I hadn't seen the bullshit that my parents were up to, I'd be as insane as my siblings. You know, it's like it's that or be in the loony bin. I mean, it's I don't get a choice to be in an insane house and call it healthy if I don't want to participate in my own, disease. I mean, so I'm happy I see the pain. It scares the hell out of me. It's miserable. It's lonely. But that means I see other people's pain too. And many of them have it more than I do. And the biggest pain that I have is we can't talk about it. I long to respond, but I'm separate. Because when I try and respond to something that people are committed to not existing because it's below the cult event horizon, they externalize and project their terror of their own pain onto me. And I become the most terrifying person in their life. And their eyes get big, their face starts twitching. You say, are you afraid? Is this too much? Are you cannot talk about this? No, everything's fine. Everything's fine. It's like, well, it seems like we cannot even talk about whether it's fine or not. I've got to go. A tennis lesson has come up suddenly. It's like, my goodness. We're so thick in the denial pattern that we can't even admit that we're denying. I mean, that would be a step in the right direction. You're bringing up something that makes me very scared. I don't know why, because I'm emotionally illiterate, but I am very scared of it. And since I don't feel this way around most people who have the common decency to avoid these sensitive topics, I'm going to solve the problem by getting rid of you. Oh, that feels great. Now I know what I'm doing. And so goodbye, Dane. I'm getting rid of you because you make me nervous. Okay, makes sense. I tried to care for your pain that you're committed to determining doesn't exist. It's lonely, of course, to see people in that amount of pain and know that they're going to punish you if you acknowledge it. But if you don't acknowledge it, you're not going to be dealing with them because they're in pain. And this has been, I would say a good 60% of my relational pain is not having a population. I long for a population that can at least be candid about the pain. But I'm separate from that population, unless I go to Thailand. I love Thailand. Why? I love Thailand. Why? Because when I'm in pain, they don't run away from it. They comfort me. They hug me. They make time for me. And when they're in pain, I do the same thing. I remember a prostitute who I got to know, because in Thailand, there's a lot of crossover between prostitution and therapeutic massage. And to handle the PTSD brought up by the Human Awareness Institute Facilitator Abandonment Protocol, I needed a lot of that kind of massage. And prostitutes put on an act for their Johns, because guys don't want an emotional prostitute. But this gal knew that I was not going to hire her as a prostitute because I hadn't, despite her seductions. I hadn't responded. And she also knew that I talked about feelings, which is not what sex addicts talk about. And so she didn't have to suppress her femininity, her true feelings, with me. So she didn't stop crying when I came in, and I learned about the mother who was prioritizing her brother over her, the mother who had abandoned her, the father who had abandoned her, the this and that and the other, and this and that and the other, and like so many traumatized, abandoned children who got the message they're worthless, they look around for worth. And one of the best ways to express worth in a culture that values money more than people is to do something high-paying. Prostitutes are very well paid. Their breasts, she had lovely breasts, very valued, very valued. So your breasts are more important than you. Your sex appeal is important to you. Suppress your feelings. Don't be honest about who you are as a person, because that's not very sexy, is it? To have a fantasy of me dominating this girl and da-da-da-da-da, and then yet she has feelings. She has a real parents. Oh, heaven forbid we deal with real people in our cult. So she talked about, and I held her, and was with her, and took her out to the beach, and took her out to dinner as a friend. Well, it's just nice to have real human beings from time to time that can cry and be cried with. And of course, being a discriminated against minority, an abused woman in a sex trade, she was not considered, of course, terribly high status in that way. So she's more intelligent, she's more emotional, she's more real. A proper Thai woman wouldn't have allowed herself to be seen crying with anyone. As superior as Thailand is in a number of respects to the U.S., it is as snobbish when it comes to chauvinism in some areas than any other. And of course, the worst is at the top. If you go to the upper echelons of Thai culture, you'll find the same dry stupidity, sociopathic behavior, children being educated in the West as you will in the United States in the upper echelons. And if you go down to the playing kids in Mexico, you'll find real healthy people. So that's a part of the joy of being in Thailand, to laugh, to cry, to be in emotional flow together as human beings before money. It's way better than sex. It's way more healing and important, which is why, of course, you will not hear any magazines talking about men's preference for deep emotions over sex, because that would turn them into real human beings. And so we'll just exist in a fantasy in which the deepest feelings of the male soul doesn't even exist, let alone have any value, because that's the kind of cruelty that we inflict on our men since birth. And having inflicted that level of cruelty and sociopathic hatred on our men by women and men alike, it's the American women who are the cruelest in this domain. Men just feel uncomfortable. It's like, I'm not supposed to have feelings. What are you doing crying or talking emotional to me, Dane? I'm a guy. Don't you understand the rules here? So they're kind of embarrassed little thing. It's the woman that you want to get close to, that you're being vulnerable with, who hates you the most, because you're embodying the feminine side that she has vowed to murder to be acceptable in a sociopathic cult. So she has to murder it in the men, who in turn murder it in her and her daughter. It's a vicious circle. So we're going to look at the circle of addiction, because all of the things that I'm looking at here increase pain. And at the point that the pain increases to a level where we go into reactivity, that's where addiction comes in. Where addiction comes in compulsion, and where compulsion comes in, it's all about human consciousness. I've got to control everything on the outside so that my ego zoom-in lens does not turn to the area of my psyche, either culturally in family or in myself. And they're all the same fractal pattern, just at different scales. And feel what's actually there. Now, the way I'm going to do and control my consciousness is by controlling all of you. You start talking about this feeling in me, you're out of here. You start talking about that feeling, you don't get a promotion. You start talking about that feeling, you're no longer invited to the party. It's very simple. We withdraw your self-esteem, your love and belonging, your survival, security, and your actual survival, unless you play by our rules. You go below the cult horizon, you're toast. And so let's look in a little bit about this. I'm going to take a break and encourage you to do the same. And we'll look at all the different roles that hold this dynamic in place.